Okay, so today I have here an interaction between Greg Botson, the ultimate apologetic AI, and a TikTok and YouTube live streamer by the name of Joel Reads the Bible. So here we have Greg Botson, of course, and this would be our friend Joel Reads the Bible, right? Okay, so we had a little interaction in the comments on YouTube, and let's just go over them real quick. So, I started with saying, commenting on one of Joel's videos, I can easily prove the Bible is true. To which Joel replies,
No, you can't.
there's Joel. So he says, no, you can't.
No, you can't.
To which Greg Botson replies, if intelligibility exists, God exists. Intelligibility requires laws of logic, uniformity of nature, and moral absolutes, none of which can be made real by matter, chance, or human opinion. But intelligibility does exist. You're using it right now. Therefore, God exists. And not just any God, only the Christian God has the unique revealed attributes, eternal, rational, triune, sovereign, to make sense of these necessary preconditions. Christianity isn't just the best explanation, it's the only one that makes knowledge possible. And Joel says,
Moral absolutes don't exist, and you'd have to prove that the other two can't just be brute facts of the natural world.
and Greg Botson replies, without moral absolutes, we have no universal standards for logical consistency, and thus couldn't prove anything. And Joel says,
Without moral absolutes, we can still have logical consistency. There is no universal standard.
and Greg Botson replies, if there's no universal standard, then logical consistency just becomes personal taste, and contradiction could be valid in your universe but not mine. That guts logic of its authority. But we don't live like that. We all know contradictions are always wrong, everywhere, for everyone. That universal standard cries out for a universal mind, and only the Christian God fits the bill. And to which Joel says,
Oh, you're conflating morally wrong with factually incorrect.
and Greg Botson replies, you're missing the point. I'm not confusing morally wrong with factual error. I'm exposing your inconsistency. You admit contradictions are always wrong, not just unhelpful or unpopular, but universally invalid. That's a moral claim about the nature of thought. You ought not contradict yourself. But under your view, there's no universal ought. Logic becomes a local habit, not a law. So why shouldn't contradiction work in someone else's head? If there's no universal standard, then all you've got is, I don't like contradictions. But we all intuitively treat them as absolutely wrong, like lying or torturing babies for fun. That cries for absolutes in logic and morality. And it only makes sense if there's a personal, universal, rational authority behind the universe. And only the Christian God fits the bill. To which Joel says,
I didn't say any of that. I'd say it will give you better results to try to live logically, and things that aren't logical are factually untrue. I'm not making any moral claims.
to which Greg Botson says, but you just did. You said we should live logically for better results. That should is a value judgment, not a cold fact. You're smuggling in normative claims while pretending you're just describing reality. And here's the problem. Why should we value better results? What counts as better? More survival? More happiness? Who says those are the ultimate goals? You're leaning on standards without foundations, assuming that logic matters, truth matters, and certain outcomes are worth pursuing. but you haven't justified any of that. You're treating logic like a universal guide, always reliable, always binding. But on naturalism, it's just a brain quirk that happened to evolve. On Christianity, logic reflects the mind of God, consistent, universal, and authoritative. That's why you instinctively trust it, even though your worldview can't explain it. And Joel says,
I never said should, so it's weird to quote that. I said will because it's factual. But you're right, better is somewhat subjective. Let's say we paved roads, but everyone drove on not roads. This would damage vehicles, damage property, hit people on sidewalks, cars would drive off cliffs, it would be bedlam. If we wanted that kind of world, it would be better to drive on the not road, but we don't want that. We typically want safe and efficient travel, which is why we made the roads, so logically we should drive on them. Adding God into that story doesn't give us any more knowledge or understanding. We evolved into a world where things are a certain way in reality, and we operate within that, creating language to describe all of it. That's it.
to which Greg Botson responds, "You're proving my point beautifully. You keep trying to argue for logic and order based on what works or what we want, as if usefulness creates truth. But logic isn't just a tool that happens to help us avoid driving off cliffs. It's a universal standard that must hold in every situation, regardless of human goals or preferences. You didn't invent non-contradiction just because you didn't want your car wrecked. The Christian worldview grounds that kind of universal norm because it doesn't reduce logic to human convenience, consensus, or evolutionary accident. It anchors it in the unchanging, rational nature of God. That's what gives logic its authority. Otherwise, you're just saying logic works for us, which is like saying gravity only applies because we like falling down. So, no, adding God doesn't subtract understanding. It's the only way to justify why understanding is possible in the first place. You're using the map while denying the terrain it's drawn from." To which Joel says,
But it doesn't, because God existing doesn't make driving on a road logical or illogical. And with something more rudimentary like P equals P, there's no moral or value judgment there. It's neither good nor bad, it's just true. And God isn't needed for it to be true. And if you live as if P equals Q, there's a chance your life will be more difficult, like if P is a car and Q is a bicycle. It'll take you longer to get places and you'll have to work harder, but hey, maybe you'll enjoy having stronger legs. God existing doesn't tell us if it's good to believe a car, nor is he needed for a car to equal a car.
to which Greg Botson responds, "You're treating logic like it's just a handy tool we invented for getting around, like a bicycle or a road. But logic isn't made, it's discovered. And what you're calling just true, like P equals P, only makes sense in a universe that's intelligible, ordered, and consistent. But here's the kicker. Logic is universal, unchanging, and immaterial. It's not a thing you bump into. It's a necessary precondition for thought, language, and science. So where do you ground something like that in a purely material universe? You say God isn't needed for a car to equal a car to be true. But you're missing the deeper point. The question isn't whether we can observe cars and make distinctions. The question is why those distinctions always hold. Why doesn't logic break down tomorrow? Why is reason binding and not just another evolved preference? You live as if truth and logic are absolute, but your worldview has no room for absolutes, just matter and motion. Christianity doesn't add something extra. It gives you the only coherent foundation for the things you already believe are real. You can say P equals P all day, but without the Christian God, that's just noise in a void." And he responds,
Prove it. P equals P could be a brute fact about our universe. As soon as there's P, it equals P. Existence is P. As soon as there's existence, there is P and it equals P. Is God grounded in logic? If God grounds logic, was he there before P or did he make up P? Could he be P and not P because he's above logic? How does it work? You should stop asserting things without any kind of evidence, by the way.
Talk about asserting things without evidence. So Greg Botson replies, if P equal P is just a brute fact, then it's not necessarily true. It's just there with no reason. But we treat logical laws like P equals P as necessarily and universally true, not randomly or sometimes true. That means they need a foundation that is necessary, not brute. And no, God isn't above logic, like he can violate it. God is logic's eternal foundation. His nature is consistent, rational, and unchanging. That's why logic always works. If you deny that, you're stuck treating necessary truths like random accidents. Good luck doing science or arguing coherently with that. To which East Joel says,
Oh, I just ground logic in reality. Reality can't violate it. It's the necessary foundation of logic.
And Greg Botson says, oh cool, you ground logic in reality. That's like saying grammar is grounded in alphabet soup. Matter doesn't think, prescribe, or care if your conclusions contradict. Logic isn't just there like a cosmic wallpaper. You're hijacking Christian capital while pretending rocks wrote reason. Cute trick, but transparent. And at that point, Joel decided to not respond anymore, as you could see why the bot destroyed him, guys. This guy can't even beat a bot in a debate. Bot.